What's going on, everybody? It's Frito here for your Overwatch, and today we're digging into the best and worst heroes once again for Season 7. This is the third video we've made for Season 7, but there's been three major shifts that have happened. Mercy with Insane Valkyrie, Mercy with nerfed Valkyrie, and now that same Mercy, but with Moira added to the game as well. Each time there has been significant changes to the rank order of how effective different heroes can be, and now with the new hero kind of settled, after a ton of time, everyone playing ranked, ourselves included, watching a lot of the pro scrims as well as other streams and whatnot, we've accumulated a lot of information for how well different characters perform in this meta, and we wanted to break that down for you here today. We've talked a lot about supports recently, so I'm going to leave them for last. Instead, let's start with the damage dealers. In my opinion, the king of the damage dealing slot is Junkrat. When Junkrat got his 2 mines, it was along with the Insane Valkyrie buff, and now that that's toned down a bit, I think Junkrat's incredibleness is starting to show through. Now, it is true that with the powerful healing of Moira, you can kind of punish aggressive spam, but at the same time, you don't get to free res pickoffs either. And with Lucio and dive comps taking a little bit of a back seat, we'll get into talking about that more later, the range damage spam is immense in the meta right now, and Junkrat's kind of the king of that because he's really hard to engage on with a mine at close range, and he just does ton of range damage as well, really pressuring down shields and potentially just getting pure pickoffs himself. And you might think to yourself, well, just surely this makes Pharah really high in the meta too, right? Because Pharah would be countering Junkrat. Well, the problem is Pharah's damage is one, slower than Junkrat's is, and with 2 mines, he can get away from her really aggressive, powerful angles anyway. And if you get into a spam off between the two, let's say both teams have equal amounts of healers, the Junkrat will just eventually win because he does more damage more quickly because he shoots faster. So oddly, in the matchup, Pharah looks more akin to a pickoff character now, where she has to tactically assassinate the heroes that she wants to go get. And I would actually rank her about middle of the pack because all the hit scans are looking really good, all the tanks are looking really good, and with Ana's 70 damage shots in order to even just be the solo answer to Pharah, along with maybe a diva on your side, it's really hard to keep that Junkrat in check. Because even if you close the distance on him, he can play keep away quite well, and just in general, the game's kind of slowed down to the pace where Junkrat looks really good a lot of the time. As for the other damage characters, Tracer and Soldier are probably among the most stable, and the rest of them, Genji, McCree, Pharah, Reaper, Hanzo, Widowmaker, results may vary based upon your own ability to play those heroes. They're not necessarily great or bad. It's going to depend on the counter matchups that you're dealing with at the time. If they're running triple tank, the Reaper's an easy choice. If they don't have dive tanks, the Widow looks really good. Context is going to matter for that quite a bit. The one hero that I think looks weaker than I'd like to see her looking is Sombra, and part of the problem of that is one of her strongest assets was using her team to farm up EMP in order to have that quick ult threat just about every team fight. Other than maps like Anubis B, where the Mega is right next to the point, I find it a little bit difficult to justify the Sombra pick because I think you can just play Moira instead for the same effect, really. The same amount of situational burst healing, just like getting to a pack, but attached to a more stable healer, and her mid-range damage is even better than Sombra's. Sombra has a little bit better of a pick-off potential, but Moira's not so bad at fading behind the enemy at a clutch moment to take out a Zen or something herself, so it's really hard for me to find a place where Sombra is necessary. Using EMP to break shields isn't that required because of how good Junkrat is. Lucio's quite low in the meta right now, so using it to disable sound barrier isn't that required either. So all things considered, I'd say Sombra's like the most situational because it's really difficult to justify her as a support anymore because the supports have got so much insane utility now. It's so much easier to run the other supports, and the value you would get by putting Sombra in the support slot, I think, is just too difficult to utilize in comparison to the other supports that already exist. And putting her in the DPS slot worked best when disable was more valuable than just raw damage. But she doesn't really fare too well against Junkrat. If you have her instead of a soldier against a soldier, you're going to be at such a range disadvantage that you sort of have to decide if you're going to go more bursty with a Tracer or just go full on with the more range damage damage. The situationalness of Sombra's disable is just kind of difficult to utilize nowadays. I think it'll start to go up again when you start to see a character that has more value wrapped up into their cooldowns. When D.Va had 4 seconds of DM and wanted to keep it up most of the time, she could kind of sneak in there and disable the D.Va, making hack worth way more than damage, because if you had a better damage character, D.Va would just eat it anyway, so the hack could kind of disable that. There really isn't that kind of opening for Sombra right now. But one hero that you may be surprised that I'm mentioning, but is a very big winner right now, is Bastion. Yep, you heard that right. Because Moira's burst AoE healing is so good, you kind of need a character like Bastion that can take up a lot of resources and do something with it. In comparison to like Tracer or McCree, they kind of need to get their burst of impact at the time. It's not like if you just put a bunch more healing into them, they'll freely get their shots. I mean, I'm sure a lot of DPS players in your games will say, if you just pocket me forever, we'll eventually win. But obviously that's not necessarily the case. Characters like Doomfist, Reaper, Zarya, Bastion, they have such a direct damage output that if you just survive long enough, you will get a free kill with that, because Zarya has tons of charge, Bastion has tons of damage. You just set them up in a spot, put tons of healing into them, and they'll eventually win the fight that way. Well, Bastion works that way. Now, he is countered by one of the best heroes, Junkrat, but in the places where the enemy isn't running Junkrat, or you can sneak a Bastion and protect it, you definitely have the healing resources in order to make Bastion work. Bastion's kind of famous for the pirate ship comp on Junkertown, but I am a little bit afraid to inform you that he's a lot better than you think, not just on that map, but on a bunch of other maps and situations too. Bastion is low-key one of the best heroes right now, and nobody seems to know it. Most particularly when you have a Moira, though. But Moira, Mercy, you get the damage amp, you get the burst healing, they can't really dive it. It's a nightmare for the enemy if you get that set up. So Bastion's really, really good. Oh, and side note, one of the best counters to Bastion right now is Mei. This is something that I think we're going to have to actively remember to try to get footage of when we encounter Bastion in our own games. We've only had this happen a couple times, but if the enemy is running a Bastion that you're really struggling against, you can wall off his line of sight to force him to reposition, or just simply make a lot of space for you to traverse forward. Or when that Bastion pirate ship comp starts rolling down the street, you can put the Mei wall under the Bastion to lift him above the Orisa barrier and focus him down that way. Mei's damage isn't so great against Bastion, but you should have other counters that are. And of course, Mei's ult is quite good against any comp that wants to death ball up, and her ult will clear the cart. But otherwise, Mei's not looking too hot, but specifically I think quite good against Bastion. Another character that I'll mention here that I think you should keep a lookout for is Doomfist. When they get those bugs fixed that they mentioned that they're going to be looking at, I think Doomfist pairs really well with Moira as well, because just like Bastion, if you can guarantee the Doomfist will stay alive a little bit longer, well, he's probably going to get another rocket punch, and that's probably another kill. He's really weak to Bastion and Orisa, who are going to be quite good for some time, but anytime that the map geometry is favorable for Doomfist to go out and win a duel somewhere, and when those counters aren't active or he can be set up to succeed, I think you're going to be surprised how good that the Fist actually is, considering how bad everyone thinks he is. He's really unreliable, but I think the addition of Moira makes him a lot better than you might think. The only hero in those categories that I haven't mentioned yet is Torb. Torb is Torb. Hasn't really changed. Molten Core is still a push-ending ultimate. He has some severe weaknesses when it comes to the range spam attrition battle. If you have him in your DPS slot and the enemy have a Junkrat, you're going to be losing shields and probably your turret as well. And I'd advocate that you probably want to consider using Torb in the support slot most of the time. Get a little greedy with it, probably with a Mercy to damage amp your Junkrat. And then the defense won't need much healing. It'll win with just the sheer amount of damage at the choke or into the enemy's oncoming attack. Moving on, let's talk about tanks. When Mercy had an instant res, Roadhog was like the king of the tank meta because he could play really ignorantly and just have a really good time. Those days are kind of over, my piggy friend. So now instead I'm going to say I think all the tanks are quite equal actually, with a slight edge to Orisa being kind of the best tank, I think, at least in matchmaking it seems. It's not going to be the case in pro play, but I think if you don't have an Orisa on your side and the enemy do, you're really going to struggle in the shield break war. More important than ranking the tanks individually though is making sure that your combos and your overall macro strategy for your team comp makes sense. This meta right now is really punishing if you don't have synergistic tanks. D.Va Roadhog, for instance, is really bad, and a good Orisa or a Zarya Rein combo is going to eat that up. Orisa Roadhog is really strong against the dive tank combo. Covered that in a video recently, how pros utilize the halt hook combination. Those two are one of the scariest ways to fortify a defense, but it has more attack than it does shielding. So conversely, Rein Zarya will have a lot more point presence and be able to survive a bit longer. And obviously, Zarya has the Queen Bee ultimate that outweighs everything else. So it kind of depends what you want to play for. If you want to play for the mid fight, Orisa Hog is really scary. If you have a little bit more patience, building up for Grav or Earth Shatter with the Zarya Rein combo is really good. I still think Zarya D.Va is underrated for punishing choke spam. It's one of the hardest combos to play though, because you got to make sure you don't matrix the bubble damage that you're trying to absorb. D.Va Winston is still insane because it gives you high ground presence where the other tanks can't. So all in all, it's going to depend on the map and what you're trying to combo with. The reason why earlier I said I think Winston is the weakest of all of them, because he doesn't fit all of the time anymore, because it's so easy for the enemy to create a really lethal death ball, and either you got to contend with the Mercy damage amp, Zenyatta Discord, or even just having your damage kind of erased by Moira. You do a big cleave, well, she just does a big cleave of healing, outdoing all of it and charging her ult. It doesn't really get you anywhere. Also, Winston's not too great at hunting down Moira, because as long as she uses fade after you leap, you can't kill her ever, because your cooldowns are 1-to-1, so she'll always have the edge on you and waste your time completely. So I love playing Winston. I think in the context of dueling certain DPS, it's pretty important sometimes to sick a Winston on them, but he looks a little bit weaker. D.Va is one of the best tanks for dealing with an enemy Moira, because eating those orbs is erasing a ton of her value. All in all, the tank's look in a good place, and it's going to be case by case specific. Now, moving on to the supports, my main man Lucio isn't looking so good, unfortunately. He's still insane at the job that he does in the times where you can use him, but unfortunately for me, being a big Lucio fan, he's kind of pushed to situational. I think the pros are going to be able to utilize him a lot more, but in matchmaking, you have to really be taking advantage of that speed boost, which is an inherently more difficult way to play the game. It can be more effective as well. It can be game winning. I still think you should always have a Lucio on King of the Hill, for instance, but there's just so many times, kind of similar to the example when I was talking about Winston, where being too aggressive just kind of gets you wrecked right now. You have to play a little bit smarter, a little bit slower, and win the ranged battle, meaning that both your team and also the enemy team won't be playing as dive happy. Now, in the cases where the enemy is playing dive and your supports can't stay alive, Lucio should be the go-to pick. Or if your team wants to play fast, I think speed boost oftentimes is required to close the distance so that you can find the engagement that you want. But in every other case, Lucio's probably one of the weaker support options, but not unusable. It's just that the other supports either have more easily obtainable value or just more applicable playstyles that fit more into how the majority of the game is getting played right now. Another hero that I'm sad to say is looking a bit weak as well is Ana. Now, I have to give a caveat to this, just like I did with Lucio. Ana can be insane. If you hit all of her abilities, she's incredible. But the problem is, just like a Hanzo or a Widowmaker pick, you have to be that great at her to really justify picking her over Mercy or Moira or even Zen, who have abilities that are pretty much just one button and you get value out of it. Even if you can't aim that well with Zen, having the orbs out provides so much value, and if you aren't hitting all of your abilities really well with Ana, she's not going to have nearly as much impact as, say, Moira's damage orb, which you sort of just toss in the middle of the fight and zaps a bunch of things for free. Using Ana's nades and sleeps takes a bit more finesse, and if you can find that value, she's really good, but just like Lucio, a little bit harder to do. Also, I'd say both those ultimates, Sound Barrier and Nano Boost, kind of need a very specific and direct usage for them. And I say that because if you use Nano Boost on, say, like a tank right now, I feel like it doesn't get nearly enough value, because say if they respond with Valk, like Valkyrie gives damage boost to the entire team. So if you Nano Boost a target, that target better be a blade or soldier sights, something that's really going to give some punching power. Just doing it on a Reinhardt or a Winston, even if you use speed amp so they go chase everybody down, typically isn't going to get as much value as like Mercy flying up in the sky, beaming on her whole team and getting reses. A lot more value can be had. Sound Barrier works kind of similar in that it's got to land in a very concise time. So if you want a defensive ultimate that you can perfectly time in order to negate the effectiveness of an incoming grav combo. That can be fine. It's just that these things are situational. Now, talking about the other support characters that we've mentioned a bit more on this channel, but we'll sum up here as well. I think Mercy's still number one. I think she's really, really good, especially in matchmaking, because the execution of trying to take and finish a lot of maps is just really hard in this game. And oftentimes in matchmaking, players just take way too much damage, play way too risky, and get picked off. And unfortunately, if you get picked off attacking Anubis B, even just one death probably means you're not finishing the map. That's just the way it works, right? So if you have Valk, you have that answer to be able to punch through without requiring basically flawless execution. Now, if you have flawless execution and you speed boost in, sound barrier, pop that nano boost on your blade, and you can wipe the entire enemy team with a nice clean engagement, that's great. But oftentimes in matchmaking, I think Mercy is still going to be the most direct answer to deal with just so many different situations. You get the double res instantly, but almost more importantly is the value of damage amping everybody, because a lot of engagements work like they're over there, you're over here, you're poking back and forth. Well, if you just Valk a little bit early, as long as they don't have a response Valk, you damage amp everybody. They lose all of their shields instantly. You have shields, they don't. You kind of just walk towards them and whittle them down. If anybody even gets picked off and bursted down, you have a res on deck. They just win pushes overall. So Mercy Valk is incredibly strong and really key to the meta right now. The other hero that I would give second place in the matchmaking meta will be Moira, because of her ability to really out-heal the mistakes of your teammates. It once was said you can't heal stupid, but you kind of can with Moira a little bit, right? If you manage your abilities really well, even if your team's taking way too much damage, you can just burst heal them back up and make them feel like they're basically invincible, because a lot of players play like they think they're invincible and they're going to get healed forever. Moira can kind of do that. We've made lots of videos talking about this, and because of that, you can really build up Coalescence very quickly, quicker than even Valk. And Coalescence is one of the best answers to Valk in the entire game, I think, next to like Soldier Sights or something. And sometimes it's even better because Moira moves at a ridiculous speed when using Coalescence, being that she's really hard to kill as well. And if Coalescence is up and Valk needs to be close to her team, Coalescence kind of wins most of the time because it whittles down most of that HP. As long as somebody kind of follows up on it, you're probably going to get that kill. So that makes Moira really good. Zenyatta's kind of tied for second place as well. Transcendence is always going to be a team fight winning ultimate potentially, as long as there's no anti-nade in play. The only problem is, in comparison to Mercy ult, it isn't as dexterous. You almost need the enemy to commit ultimates into the fight and you respond with trance, because Mercy's ult has the opportunity to use damage amp if you don't need to heal, and then you just start mowing down the enemy's defenses and wipe them out that way, and it lasts 20 seconds, of course, which is forever. Trance lasts a very short amount of time and gives you basically infinite health, but that might not be enough. They may still just be able to stall their own lives, and if you don't have enough damage, then, well, trance is over and you didn't win the team fight and it's not good enough. So trance kind of has to be used in those scenarios where they're trying to follow up on a grav. You respond with trance, make them waste more ultimates. It's kind of used that way. It's more of a defensive ult, whereas Mercy oftentimes is a good enough defensive ult, but also is like an offensive push sieging ult as well. Last hero in the hero pool, Symmetra. Sometimes I don't mention Symmetra and I forget about that and everybody gets mad at me. Sim's actually, I think, in one of the best spots she's ever been. The only problem is you kind of don't need Sim in a lot of ways because Mercy is just so good anyway. I can't really say that there's a big reason to pick Sim over Mercy. If you want to get Telly, well, you might as well just have Valk instead. Almost does the same thing, and it's probably just better. However, because Mercy's so good, and also Moira has so much healing as well, if you have a really strong solo healer, perhaps Symmetra can fit into the off support category, especially in the cases where you're trying to beef up your ranged spam, namely going into those chokes where she definitely can hit her abilities, and of course her projected barrier adds a lot to the shield break battle, but I think you're also going to need 2 DPS characters to really supplement that and take advantage of it. Also, Sim is one of those good answers against Bastion as well. Not enough for a solo answer, but will kind of help buffer the engagements, tossing that projected barrier at his turreted position, as well as orb him from range. You'll need more characters to help deal with that, but she can be a useful option as well. Other counters to Bastion that I kind of forgot to mention would be Roadhog and Reaper, because you need characters that are able to pounce on his positioning and either burst him down, or Hook takes him out of turret form, which is really important, Orisa is really good as well because you could take him off the cart, pull him off the high ground, depending on where he's set up. That's really good. And look out for playing characters that you used to think countered Bastion back in the day. Pharah and Genji were quite good. Both of them aren't very good at countering Bastion anymore, actually, because his damage is lower and his resistance is higher, meaning that Genji Reflect isn't as good, and also Pharah's rockets are just too slow, really, to take him down efficiently. She can crowd control the Ryan away from him if that's what they're running, but it's going to be really difficult for her to find an angle on a Bastion Orisa setup. Okay, so that's everything for today's Moira meta review. Went over every character. Let us know your thoughts on the current balance of the game and the winners and losers of the current patch. If you enjoyed the video and you found it useful, please leave a like. It really does help us out and lets us know that you're enjoying the content. If you haven't already, please subscribe because we upload each and every day, so you're going to want to hit the bell icon so that you get notified when our videos go live. Linked in the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.